Good evening, everyone. We're going to start in just a few moments. We'll give it a couple just to let everyone enter the Zoom meeting that's been in the waiting room, waiting patiently. So thank you for that. We're very excited to host this evening's the third night in the PKD Summit 2022. We have a very exciting presentation about to take place with Dr. Pei and Dr. Weimbs. So just bear with us a couple minutes as we let people into the room, and then we'll get started. Thank you very much. Good evening again, everyone. We're going to get started momentarily. We're just waiting a couple minutes to allow the room to fill up. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned momentarily. Okay, it looks like the room is getting there. So we'll commence with the introductions, and we'll welcome Doctors Pei and Weimbs to the conversation momentarily. We're just going to go through a couple housekeeping items first. So please note, throughout the evening, your cameras have been disabled and your computers are muted. You have the opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A box throughout the sessions. It's located at the bottom of your computer screen along the bottom panel of the Zoom. And any technical questions, so if you're having a hard time with any of the audio or visual components of this evening's presentations, please jump into the chat box and select the panelists, and Marie from Live Agency will be able to assist you. So we have a Q&A box for you to ask your questions throughout the session. And of course, at the tail end of each presentation, we will open the floor to the Q&A discussion. So as you come up with the questions, feel free to add them into the box, and we'll address them in the last portion of each presentation this evening. The conference is being recorded, so don't worry about taking any diligent notes throughout the evening. The presentations and the audio will be available after the fact. So sit back and enjoy the information that is shared this evening. So we're amidst the housekeeping items right now, of course. From 6:35 until 7:45. We will be joined momentarily by Dr. York Pei and Dr. Thomas Weimbs, who will be covering ketogenic dietary interventions in ADPKD. And we'll be having an open conversation about this and the upcoming clinical trial taking place in the new year, based out of Toronto. After that, for the latter portion of this evening's event, I will be presenting on the PKD Foundation of Canada. We'll be highlighting the work that we do as an organization, the work that is yet to be done. And then I'll be joined in the latter portion of my presentation by Kira Morin, a PKD advocate, who is going to share a bit about her PKD journey and why she's chosen the opportunity to become the outstanding advocate for the PKD community that she is. We'll then wrap it up with closing remarks and a couple final items, and then that will be it for this evening. So I would now like to take this opportunity to introduce Drs. York Pei and Dr. Thomas Weimbs. Both of these individuals this evening will discuss their upcoming clinical trial to test the long-term Outcomes of Ketogenic Dietary Interventions in ADPKD. The planned trial will be conducted at the University of Toronto by Dr. Pei and his team. Dr. Pei is a prominent nephrologist and PKD researcher at the University of Toronto. The clinical trial is supported in part by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and Santa Barbara Nutrients, a company founded by University of California, Santa Barbara professor and PKD researcher Thomas Weimbs. The trial is also a collaboration with the Ren.Nu dietary program for ADPKD that is led by renal dietitian Jessianna Saville, who has presented for the foundation before, and her team. ADPKD patients in this trial will learn how to implement a plant-focused ketogenic diet together with Santa Barbara Nutrients medical food, KetoCitra, and will be then followed for a year to assess the feasibility, tolerability, effects on metabolism, body weight, pain levels, and changes in renal function and total kidney volume. As I mentioned, there will be a Q&A portion of the event at the end. So a bit about our presenters before we dive into the presentation. Dr. York Pei is a senior scientist from the Toronto General Research Institute, University Health Network, and is the director of the Center for Innovative Management of Polycystic Kidney Disease out of the University Health Network. His research is mainly focused on identifying the genetic factors involved in the initiation or progression of genetic kidney diseases as a target for developing novel diagnostic tests and therapies. His research program focuses on genetic, genomic, and translational research for hereditary kidney diseases, with a major focus on autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease, or ADPKD. He has also made important contributions to genetic research of other hereditary kidney diseases, including familial IgA nephropathy, familial nephrotic syndrome, and Alport syndrome. He has published over 150 peer-reviewed articles, has collaborated widely with researchers nationally and internationally, and has trained numerous clinical and research fellows in hereditary kidney disease. Dr. Pei has founded the Center for Innovative Management of Polycystic Kidney Disease in 2015, I should say, which provides advanced diagnostic and novel therapeutic for ADPKD. More than 500 patients are currently followed or co-managed at the center, with over 95% of them involved in at least one research project. Dr. Thomas Weimbs is a professor at the University of California in Santa Barbara, where he directs a research laboratory focused on PKD. He received his doctoral degree from the University of Cologne, Germany, and then conducted postdoctoral research at the University of California in San Francisco. In 1999, he started his first independent research laboratory at the Lerner Research Institute of the Cleveland Clinic as an assistant professor. There, he started to research PKD after he was approached by a local family affected by this disease, who financially supported research in his newly founded laboratory. Their family foundation still supports PKD research in Dr. Weimbs' lab today. In 2005, Dr. Weimbs moved his lab back to California to join the Department of Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology at UCSB. His lab studies molecular mechanisms underlying PKD with an emphasis towards developing new therapies. Research from Dr. Weimbs' lab have led to a better understanding of PKD and led to novel methods to deliver therapeutics specifically to polycystic kidneys. Some of the most recent research has led to the discovery that dietary interventions and natural metabolites strongly slow PKD progression in animal models. This led to the launch of Santa Barbara Nutrients with the goal to make approaches available for the nutritional management of PKD and to support kidney health. Research in Dr. Weimbs' laboratory has been funded by grants from federal agencies, including the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Defense, by private foundations, including the Lillian Goldman Charitable Trust, the Amy B. Goldman Foundation, and the Jarrett Family Fund, as well as several biotech companies. So I'd like to welcome both Drs. Pei and Dr. Weimbs to the conversation today. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi.
So we're going to have a bit of an organic conversation, of course, just what I've summarized already today about the upcoming clinical trial. So Dr. Weimbs, I know you have a couple slides to show. Maybe you can, while you're going through those, talk a bit about Santa Barbara nutrients, keto diets, and KetoCitra to get things going.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff, for having me. And it's great to be here again. And yes, so Dr. Pei and I were thinking of just having a bit of a casual conversation about what we're up to. But to get everyone on the same page, it might be not a bad idea to look at a couple of slides first, so we know what we're even talking about. So let me share my slides here. So just real quick, disclosure slides are always fun to look at. Also, as you mentioned, my day job is as a professor at UC Santa Barbara, but important here is that I'm also the founder and president of Santa Barbara Nutrients. So just want to make sure everybody knows that. And so what we're really talking about, of course, is in polycystic kidney disease. What happens in patients is that the kidneys go from, normal to cystic, and, they keep on progressing over time. And what we want to do is slow the progression, stop it, who knows, maybe reverse it. And the traditional approach that is usually taken by, most scientists in the field and clinicians is a pharmacological approach. And there's 1,000 reasons for this. Most have to do with funding and money that kind of drives the research in that direction. But of course, besides the pharmacological approach, maybe there could be something else out there. And something we had stumbled on in my lab, and many other labs are coming in the same direction, is the question: what if there are other factors that are influencing the progression of PKD, and what if we could just address those factors by maybe non-pharmacological means? And I'm talking specifically about diet and lifestyle factors here. And what we had been working on is sort of like two kind of like zigzag clouds here. One, we call it the kidney stone risk, which we think is very important in accelerating the progression in PKD patients. And the other one up here is metabolic disease, same thing. So we think it makes it worse. And those are all things that can be potentially, you can take them away. You can take those risks away. And then we would call this a conservative approach, essentially. So, and of course, conservative approaches are always, something you would want to go after. Prevention is preferable to cure, first do no harm, and so on. So just a couple of slides on, some of the papers from my lab that sort of like led us to think in those directions. And I'm not going to go through those papers, but one of them deals with the crystal story, I like to call it, where we found that these microcrystals that can form in kidneys and eventually go on to form kidney stones, that they can make the progression of PKD much worse. And so if anyone wants to look this up, here's the paper, and there was an editorial in Nature Reviews Nephrology, which is maybe a little bit easier to digest. So that's one part of the story. And kind of an interesting twist here is, let me just go back. So what we found is that a very simple, supplementing these animals with something really simple, such as citrate, or citric acid, if you will, was already enough to be highly beneficial. And the reason is that citrate is the normal defense of the kidney against these crystals, these microcrystals. And amazingly, this has been known for over 20 years based on the work from another investigator from way back then, who published a series of I think terrific papers finding the same thing, that citrate treatment is highly effective in this case in a rat model of PKD. And nothing really literally happened for these entire 20 years since this was discovered. And I think the reason is twofold. Number one, at the time, they couldn't figure out what the mechanism is, why citrate was important. And we think that our work kind of identified this mechanism. But number two, the problem is that citrate is essentially food. It's not a drug. No pharmaceutical company could, dive into this and turn this into a pharmacological agent. So that means there's no funding for it, and essentially this was, quickly buried and forgotten, which I think is a shame. But anyway, now we have unburied it, I think, and so we would put sort of a little into this little kidney stone risk cloud, some measures one could take conservatively to kind of approach this kidney stone risk. And so the other factor is this metabolic disease risk, if you will. And so we had in 2019, it's the same year, we had another paper out there. Again, people can look it up. There was another editorial in Nature Reviews Nephrology, easier to read perhaps. And the bottom line there was that the metabolic state of ketosis turned out to be highly beneficial, again, in rats and mice and cats with polycystic kidney disease. And I think probably many people know what ketosis means. Maybe some, I'm sure, don't know what it means. And there's a thing called a ketogenic diet. And I wanted to go into it just like for a split second here, just so we all are on the same page. So a normal standard American diet, and I'm sure it's very similar in the standard Canadian diet. The nice thing about the standard American diet is that it's abbreviated SAD, SAD, so it's a SAD diet. So a standard American diet is a very high carbohydrate diet, like over 50% typically of the calories come from carbohydrates, from sugar, starch, and so on. And then, you have some fat and you have some protein in there. And you can actually turn this around in the form of a very low-carb diet, also called a ketogenic diet, where essentially you flip the fats and the carbs around. So you make the carbs a small fraction and the fats a much larger fraction, and you keep the proteins about the same. This is what's called a ketogenic diet. And then, many different flavors of a ketogenic diet. Just to bust a myth real quick, a ketogenic diet does not necessarily have to be a high protein diet. That's usually sort of the misconception that leads doctors to say, whoa, this can't be good for kidneys because it's a high protein diet. It's not a high protein diet. So you can make a ketogenic diet with just moderate protein. All right. So one thing to keep in mind, so ketosis is actually the normal physiological response that we humans have, as well as all the mammals out there. It's a response to periods of fasting, essentially, and this developed, in us humans, for example, over millions of years. When we became hunter-gatherers, our food sources were never really constant, right? We didn't have a refrigerator in those days. We didn't have a grocery store and a bakery and at every corner and so on. So if the family clan was lucky hunting, they had something to eat, and if they were unlucky, they were in ketosis. And this has changed over the last 50 or so years with our lifestyle being very different, and us now being on high carbohydrate diets and us looking like this instead of like that guy. So, so this is just to emphasize that ketosis is actually just a normal process that we have evolved to be in and out of. So this is nothing abnormal. And unfortunately, there's also the misconception often that ketosis is to be avoided and is dangerous. And that's actually not the case. All right. So let me just skip this slide and go on to the next one. There's a couple additional studies that are sort of the justification for what Dr. Pei and I are planning to do. One is another study from my lab done by Sebastian Strubel. This was a what's called a case series study. And, there are different levels of clinical studies. The bottom one is a case report, where a doctor reports on one patient. The next level up is a case series where you report on a bunch of patients. And then it goes, up from there. You have randomized prospective studies and so on. So this was a relatively low bar type of study, a case series study, where we identified about 131 patients that had already experimented with ketogenic diets, and looked at their self-reported data, and the study was just amazingly interesting, I think. The results are very interesting. Of course, there was a benefit with obesity and overweight. But interestingly, 86% of the patients in this study reported that the ketogenic type of diets either strongly or somewhat improved their health and well-being. And many of them experienced improvement in their blood pressure, in the hypertension, which is very common in PKD. And many of them also showed an improvement in their kidney function, at least as measured by the creatinine and calculated as eGFR. So this is published, and everyone can of course look this up. But a case series study is still a retrospective study. There's self-reported data. There are many caveats, so you cannot take this as gospel yet. A better study is a randomized prospective study, which we have contributed to. And this was really a study done by Dr. Roman Müller in Cologne, it's the University of Cologne in Germany. And just real quick, what does this mean, randomized prospective? So this is a study where you recruit patients, in this case 63, and they were randomized into 3 arms. One was a ketogenic diet, one was intermittent fasting, one was control, so no change in diet. And then you tell them what to do. And in this case, they were on the dietary interventions for 3 months and were analyzed afterwards. So this is a much higher level of sort of clinical trial, but a short-term study. So that's one big caveat. And the results were just presented at the American Society of Nephrology Kidney Week conference, where Jeff was also there, and we saw each other. And this shows some of the data. The full results will be reported in a paper, hopefully sometime soon. But the data were surprisingly amazing. The study was actually really only designed to look for feasibility of dietary, ketogenic interventions. But surprisingly, there appeared to be a potential benefit, even in such a short term already. And you can see, for example, in this graph here, that the kidney function as measured by GFR, went down just a little bit, or essentially stayed the same in the control group, and it actually increased in the ketogenic arm. So that was a surprise. Another surprise was that total kidney volume as measured by MRI scanning also seemed to have a trend towards decreasing. Sorry, that's the whatever color is this is the green line here. So that is unheard of, but the study was too small to make a very strong statement out of it, and also too short term. So what's really needed is a much longer term study with more patients. So we're getting there. All right, but my point here is that metabolic diseases can also be addressed with conservative approaches, with dietary interventions. You can address things like high carb diets, avoidance of ketosis, obesity, overweight, metabolic syndrome, and so on. So these are all things that can be addressed with dietary and lifestyle changes. And let me just go back here for 1 second. One potential side effect of ketogenic diets is kidney stone. So that's well reported in the literature that about 8% or so of people on ketogenic diets, develop clinical kidney stone disease. So that's of course a concern. And there were two people with kidney stones in the ketogenic diet arm in the German study. There was also elevation in uric acid in some of these patients. So that's always a concern. And I think it is good to actually address both of these at the same time, the kidney stone risk and the metabolic disease risk. You might as well do that. And we have actually done this by essentially combining keto and citrate. As Jeff mentioned, we launched a company out of UC Santa Barbara. It's called Santa Barbara Nutrients, and have developed what's called a medical food called KetoCitra. And again, full disclosure, I'm the founder and president of Santa Barbara Nutrients. KetoCitra essentially looks like this. It contains the exogenous ketone beta-hydroxybutyrate to support ketosis. And it also contains citrate and what we call alkaline base to support the measures to normalize kidney parameters so that the risk for kidney stone disease may not play as big a role as it otherwise might be on a ketogenic diet. And we have also worked with a group of really fantastic renal dietitians. Jessianna Saville is leading the group, and Diana Bruin was really instrumental in putting this together and putting the what we call the Ren.Nu dietary program together. And Ren.Nu stands for renal nutrition, and you renew your kidneys, if you will. It's a ketogenic diet, which means we're aiming for a decrease in blood glucose. We're raising blood BHB levels. We reduce body fat and obesity. It's a plant-focused diet, which helps with urine alkalinization and lowering some of the renal stressors, such as uric acid precursors. It's a low oxalate and low phosphate diet. Again, those are renal stressors. And it incorporates this medical food KetoCitra as well. And it's a 3-month program. My screen seems to be a little bit, oops. Here we go. It's a 3-month program, and we recently published a paper. And again, anyone is welcome to read up on it or look it up. Where we this was not a clinical study, not even at all a clinical study. This was a beta test of the program with 24 participants with ADPKD. But the initial results were really highly promising. People in the program were very positive about it and thought that their PKD symptoms improved, including things like hypertension and so on. So this Ren.Nu program, now we're coming to what we're actually talking about is where we would, team up with Dr. Pei and his fantastic team and use the Ren.Nu program as essentially the training phase for a clinical study that will be done in Toronto. And essentially the Ren.Nu program is kind of broken into different steps. The first month is an onboarding step. And then it starts with teaching participants how to implement a ketogenic diet and how to track their macronutrients, how to measure their own parameters such as blood ketones, glucose, urine pH, blood pressure, and so on. Then in the last month or so, it's all about sustainability to teach everybody how to really carry this forward, the diet and lifestyle changes to make them sustainable and so that it's not a very restrictive diet. And as now we can discuss, the plan is to use this program and then follow patients for a year. We're planning to do to do this with Dr. Pei, and we can talk about all these parameters. We're also planning essentially the same study protocol as a clinical study in Japan, in Tokyo, which I'm very excited about, with Dr. Hori. And Jess Saville, leading the Ren.Nu program, is involved in all this as well. So that's all I wanted to just show real quick. Let me just stop sharing here, just so that we have a kind of a bit of a basis for what we're discussing.
That was fantastic, Thomas. Thank you for the overview. And just before we jump in with Dr. Pei and speak about the formalities of the actual trial out of TGH, Health Canada recently approved KetoCitra, correct, for
right.
Canadians.
Yes.
So do you want to just speak a bit to that recent approval as well?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Yeah, so KetoCitra was just approved as what's called a natural health product in Canada. It's not quite available yet as a natural health product because we first have to put the proper Canadian label on it, 2 languages and all, and so that's not available. But so currently, anyone can of course look at this on the US website and even order it there if somebody wants to, and that's available worldwide. But soon we're hoping to have a proper Canadian labeled product available in Canada that practitioners can recommend and so on. Great.
Okay, so just as Dr. Weimbs showed a few slides that just touched on the high level elements of a keto diet. As we both mentioned earlier tonight, we were joined by Jessianna Saville for a webinar on clarity on keto for PKD. Is it right for you? So this was a webinar we did back in mid-June that is available on our website, npkd.ca/webinars. So it would be a great accompanying piece to this presentation, of course, to get a better sense of the actual impact of a keto diet and what that would entail for a PKD patient. So that is available online now as well. Dr. Pei, jump in and talk to us a bit about your involvement in this. Why I know you're working on elements of this with your patients already, and diet is a huge factor. Can you talk to us a bit about what piqued your interest in the work that Thomas was doing, and why this clinical trial out of your PKD clinic is so important?
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Jeff, for the great introduction. I think before I talk about the trial, I want to kind of give you some background from my own perspective. I also want to just provide a little bit of counterweight to Thomas. Like, I know he's very enthusiastic about his work, but as a doctor, I also fully know the grim statistics of any novel therapy, like making to let's say phase 2-3 clinical trial, more than 80% failure rate. So I think the animal study are very exciting and has good rationale and good very interesting results. But I think we need to just be a little bit more cautious when I just want to emphasize that there is no proven evidence that this approach actually slow PKD at this time. And that's what we want to try to seek further evidence. And so I just want to make this disclosure as a kind of a counterweight to Thomas, because I know you're very enthusiastic about your work. And I also share your enthusiasm, but as doctors dealing with patients rather than rats or mice, we have a somewhat different perspective. And we are always reminded that many promising therapy that look amazing and all that actually turn out not to work when in the final analysis. But it also provides an incentive why I want to be involved, because I'm very interested. I think that there is very good rationale, and my involvement actually kind of dated not directly, but somewhat indirectly, but quite a while ago. I have a good friend who's a professor at the university. They practice intermittent fasting, and so which also generate very similar kind of effect in terms of ketosis. And then this is probably 10 years ago, and then we every time we have dinner party, like he would give me more interesting work, and then I start to pay attention to the field, and then I think there's a lot of interest about metabolic modulation using dietary approach, not only to try to address the kind of epidemic obesity or overweight kind of a problem we see in developed countries, but from also an anti-aging perspective, there's actually quite a bit of preclinical and clinical information, and perhaps through activation of the AMPK or suppression of the mTOR pathway, which are very well kind of studied in experimental kind of disease states, and had really very fascinating kind of results. So I myself actually try to practice a little bit like time-restricted feeding, and I could kind of pinch my belly fat, and I could see like differences. So I think that the approach that Thomas is taken, and the program that was developed is actually very thoughtful and interesting. And so I think, and then I think Thomas' team published a couple of papers that he mentioned about, one on the potential effect of microcrystal in kidney injury in the context of ADPKD. And then the other thing is the different kind of maneuver inducing this ketosis state in different models of ADPKD. I think that is makes a lot of sense, but I also want to remind, sometimes things make a lot of sense may not work. And so I certainly would hope that we could prove it. And I think that's why I think I want to be involved in this trial. And I do have a number of comments so I want to just dampen your enthusiasm a little bit. I think that there's very high probability that this kind of approach will improve metabolic health. I think that the success rate to kind of improve our metabolic health with this kind of approach is, I would rate it as probably had good likelihood of success. But whether this type of approach will slow PKD progression, I don't know at this time. And that's why I want to be a skeptic, and we should try to develop more evidence-based type of guidance for patients. So I think as a patient, I fully understand that you want to have hope for a disease that is chronic and also devastating sometimes. But I also want to caution that we have to be careful not to overread too much when the evidence is not quite complete as it is in this time, at least not in human. I think there are interesting trends. There are small study, there are uncontrolled or small control study. So I think that I kind of also make some kind of comment from my own perspective, because I look up a lot of patients, and it turns out that I have half a dozen patients who are already doing intermittent fasting or ketogenic diet, or including a couple who was actually enrolled in Thomas' program. So I have a little bit of a kind of a perspective, like in an uncontrolled way, kind of peeking into them, and also like doing some extra tests just to see, like for safety, and just to see, like, because getting some kind of anecdotal results. So I can see in some patients there seems to be very good results in terms of the metabolic health. I can't comment on the PKD aspect because for individual patient, there's no control. We know that this is a disease that's highly variable. When you have two groups of patients, like randomized in a reasonably large number, you have good confidence that you could potentially compare the average effect of the two groups like due to a specific maneuver, and you could make some kind of deduction whether it's making it better or worse or no difference. But for an individual patient, we just cannot. It's the same kind of question for tolvaptan. I have a patient, like for example, common question, a patient who are on tolvaptan, they say, well, can you tell me whether the drug is helping me? And I said, I can't, because I don't really know the rate of change before and after in your case. And also we know that even kidney function, the rate of change is not always follow a straight line in the natural history of polycystic kidney. So that makes it very difficult to make any kind of extrapolation. One other thing I want to comment, so I see that in some patients, some of these patients who practice this type of dietary maneuver, I can see some pretty good results. But on the other hand, I've also seen patients, they're on a so-called ketogenic diet with a total cholesterol of 10 millimole, which is up the roof, and high LDL cholesterol. And then when I talked to this patient, the high fat component that she's taking is she's eating pig skin with this kind of fat, okay, in her. So not all fat are good. I think so one have to make distinction that you can have high fat, but sometimes some fat may be potentially not as good and may potentially do harm. And actually, as an anecdote, I have recently a patient who is in Thomas program, and he did some 24-hour urine. So I was actually intrigued by your comment in the second study you mentioned, the small randomized controlled trial, that there may be two individuals who have kidney stones. And so I know that your diet is low in oxalate. So when you have low in oxalate, oxalate binds calcium in the gut. So sometimes you would have increased calcium absorption and potentially high calcium in the urine. So in this particular patient, again, this is anecdotal, his urinary calcium concentration is very high, as well as excretion rate, total calcium. So this potentially could be a risk for kidney stone. Again, we cannot generalize anything based on one patient, but I just want to make some anecdote. So I think that's, for this kind of reason, I think that for the clinical trial that we are hoping to embark in, maybe in the new year, that we will be particularly interested to measure all these parameters, the risk of kidney stone and kidney function. One other thing is EGFR. Like, I would also caution the interpretation, because the diet that is involved, there is a slight protein restriction. So we know that the EGFR comes from creatinine-based kind of kidney function measurement, and creatinine, it comes from creatine, which is a muscle protein. So when you're on slight protein restriction, sometimes it could affect your muscle mass, and so the kidney function may not, like creatinine-based kidney function may not be accurate in terms of reflecting the actual kidney function. So I think in the trial, we are mindful about that we want to use some non-creatinine-based approach of measuring kidney function. So that's how I kind of see things. I think that it is interesting. It is a lot of very interesting work, but not proven, like, at least to me. And that's why I do want to get involved to generate some higher level kind of evidence. And I think Dr. Hori from Japan, I think if he could also contribute, I think hopefully between the two of us, we could have some kind of contribute maybe a little bit. I don't think, I'm still skeptical that we would be able to prove the kidney benefit. I think the best I was hoping for is that we could prove that this has reasonably good prospect for improving metabolic health, and also define what are the boundary of potential risks, like how many patients would have high cholesterol, or particularly the bad cholesterol, and how many patients have enhanced stone risk, and then how do we, in that case, how do we, if the patient want to continue, like are there any way that we can mitigate this kind of risk? I think that's what we hope to learn from this kind of a study. I'm not particularly optimistic that certainly in the Toronto study with 80 patients, it's unlikely we will be able to demonstrate difference in kidney volume, even for 1 year. Tolvaptan, which has very large effect, it literally took close to 1,000 patients. So I think we have to really match this patient very well, but I also would just say that the trial that we proposing is not definitive either. I think it will provide some information and hopefully pretty good amount of information about safety and tolerability and metabolic health. I think those markers we can measure and probably are quite reliable. The kidney disease severity, whether we can impact on that, I'm a bit more skeptic, but maybe Thomas will convince me. But I think ultimately, I think it's the data that speak the most. Like it's not whether we believe in something deeply, but it's really the result of these kind of more controlled trial. And I think then, and in aggregate, multiple studies showing you will help to convince the community. And I think, so I don't want to sound negative. I just want to provide a kind of a counter perspective. Obviously, if I am too negative, I wouldn't be involved in the trial because I do think that this is promising, but I just want to provide a counterweight so that we are balanced. We kind of have a really full disclosure from both sides, and this is not any kind of criticism, but I think it is just I want the patient to understand and that scientific advance takes time. And often I know that you want to know like yesterday, but things actually, when you go to the level of the human, is much more difficult and it is much more time consuming. I think in my own mind, I think that the best we could come up with is that we could conclude about like this 1 year study, how it impacts on the metabolic health, which is equally important because we know that metabolic health is a modifier of disease severity in ADPKD. I don't think we'll be able to fully address and prove that it will slow ADPKD in the trial, but this is my own perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an important one, and then I'll let you jump in, Dr. Weimbs, to counter Dr. Pei's points. We all know, and those in attendance know, that the PKD community is always chomping at the bit for any progress made, whether that comes from dietary elements like ketosis or whether it comes from treatments like GnRH. And we recognize that for so long there were no options. The first treatment was only improved in 2015. So everyone is very excited when they hear promising new information. I think by having you both here tonight to keep a balanced dialogue with respect to that is, of course, in the best interest of the PKD community. We want to recognize the importance of hope and new options being presented. But of course, then Dr. Pei and Dr. Weimbs, their end result, of course, is the best care for PKD patients as well. And that does take time, as Dr. Pei mentioned. Dr. Weimbs, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just so yes, and York, you and I, of course, we have talked about all this, many times. So, I think we're all on the same page, and really, that's a reason to do these studies, to actually document and show what happens, with scientific accuracy. So that's otherwise, we wouldn't need to do trials if we didn't want to know that. So yes, I totally agree. I'm probably more optimistic than you, just because, the effect size we have seen, starting from animal studies, it just essentially blows all the pharmacological interventions out of the water that we have tried. The sort of anecdotal evidence, if you will, from like 100+ patients that have gone through the Ren.Nu program has just been quite overwhelming. And I think that doesn't happen normally too much in clinical practice, that people, have really good things to say about their improvement in their health. But we'll see, we'll have to document it, and, risk assessment is very important. Long-term effects are very important. And maybe one thing to highlight also is, and I think that happened a lot, that people read something about keto being beneficial in PKD, and they're going to Dr. Google and find out how to do keto, the internet version. And I think that can potentially backfire. So I would kind of caution everyone out there, to not just simply willy-nilly find their, some random keto diet set of recipes out there and trying it, because there's a risk for increased kidney stone, and many keto diets out there are high meat, high protein type of diets. So that was actually one of the main reasons why we started to work with very experienced renal dietitians to come up with a program that is really designed to be, much more safe for kidney patients and for PKD patients. So yeah, all right.
And you shared those resources, those sites, as part of your slides earlier. And of course, they can revisit that slide. I'm a member of your Facebook groups as well, so I see the dialogue both from the renal dietitian side and Jessianna, but then the patient engagement as well, which is very impressive, because we know the PKD community is very intelligent and on top of all of the new information that presents itself. But the sense of community in those groups, I think, speaks to the success of the program, because these are patients also supporting patients within it, right? And I know the questions are starting to blow up, so we'll be mindful to give them as much attention tonight as possible. But can you speak a bit about, and this is for you, Thomas, speak a bit about the initial hurdles and challenges that one might face when starting a keto diet again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so, there's a keto flu that I think people might have heard about, if you're, and it especially hits people that maybe have never been in ketosis or never for like long time. And most, Americans in a typical lifestyle are probably never in ketosis. So, and you start eating breakfast with your cornflakes and this and that, and you have lunch and you have dinner and you have snacks and in between. So our bodies are really not used to burning fats anymore. They are only in carb mode. So if you switch this around, oftentimes people experience, these keto flu symptoms. There can be like headache, people are tired, but it's actually fairly straightforward to get around those if you do it right. And that's part of the Ren.Nu program, to teach people how to do it right, to have a much easier transition. It's still a little bit rough, maybe the first couple of weeks, because oftentimes the body is just not used to it. And I think what helps is to supply proper electrolytes during that time. I also think the exogenous BHB is really helpful there, and that comes with KetoCitra, because it really starts teaching the body what a ketone is, and the cells in the body start remembering, I'm supposed to metabolize these things, and they have to start changing the gene expression and so on. So that's one of the things that happens. There's a bit of a hurdle, but so once you're over the hump initially, from then on, it's much easier sailing, and a lot of patients think then they have a lot more energy. That's like very, very common. People have just more energy, they can think clearer, which has, I think, has to do with ketones being the preferred fuel for the neurons in the brain. So the benefits kind of kick in after some time.
Okay, before we dive into the questions, Dr. Pei, would you be able to speak just a bit about the actual process surrounding getting involved in a clinical trial at your institute, and what that would look like for anyone that may be on this call or watching at a later date that would be interested? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, but if I could just make a couple of comments, I want to give a counterpoint to Thomas so that we have different perspectives. So I think that I like this program in two ways, because up to now, when we think about diet in kidney disease, people actually are fixated, and they know the best is the diet that is recommended for patients who have advanced kidney disease, which are very restrictive diet. So unfortunately, we have a large popular patient who actually have modest or mild kidney failure. And I think this is what this program is aiming at. They don't really have any guidance, and they actually should not be on this very restrictive diet because it's actually very unhealthy. But because the restriction is mainly to try to deal with minimizing uremia, the effect of the toxin build up in the blood in advanced kidney failure. So I often talk to patients, and they keep telling me that on this diet to them means they're actually talking about this restrictive diet for very advanced kidney disease. But what is lacking is a large portion of the patient, they don't have this advanced kidney disease. They think that they should be on this restrictive diet, which is actually may not be very healthy. It's just to minimize the symptom so that you can maybe prolong the need for dialysis a little bit longer. And so I think there's a need for more formal dietary approach, promoting a healthier kind of diet. Because when I talk to the dietitian, they're not talking about this, like well, the renal dietitian. Very few actually are very familiar with the type of things that Thomas and Jessianna are doing. So I think that I kind of congratulate them for being the first to really systematically kind of provide an approach, a standardized approach. They could be modified as we learn more about this diet. Maybe there's certain downside for a certain component that we may have to modify for specific patients. So I kind of like it, and that's why I think, and the point that he was making about like ketosis can be induced by different methods. And that's why I don't want to, I think when you're thinking about a trial, it's better to standardize, to test a standardized program, which we know is very well defined, than having a heterogeneous number of patients doing different things. Then at the end, if things don't work, we don't know why it don't work. And then it may have very mixed results. At least I hope that at the end of the day, we will find out in this program what are the strengths and weaknesses, and in a kind of a uniform approach, and then whether any kind of modification may be needed if there's some downside and to this specific downside. So I think those are the comments I just want to make. We are still a little bit delayed in getting this protocol. My gut feeling is probably the study won't be ready until probably in March. Like I think realistically, also having to go through the REB, and so I think if you're interested, maybe you can contact us, and we could put you on a list, a wait list. And then once we are ready, we can contact you. I think that probably would be the best way, rather than having you calling like too many times. And I think that it is a little bit trickier because there's a lot of things that we have to go through, and getting the research ethics board kind of approval is a timely kind of a time-consuming process.
Okay, and so I know, of course, Dr. Pei, you'll be communicating to your patients internally. Thomas, you'll surely be sharing insight and information when this clinical trial is open. And then we as a patient foundation will be promoting this clinical trial as well when it opens. So as we get more information from Dr. Pei and Dr. Weimbs, we'll of course share it with the PKD community through our website and e-news and social media channels. So we'll consider that a stay tuned item. If okay with both of you, I would love to jump into the Q&A. Is that okay with you both?
Sure.
Okay. We have the first question this evening from Derek. Are there considerations to be taken for PKD patients interested in trying a keto diet who are also diabetic?
Well, I would say, I'm assuming type 2 diabetic. Derek is asking about, there's an insane amount of really good data on reversing type 2 diabetes with ketogenic diets. So that's actually a perfect fit, for someone who has type 2 diabetes to think about a ketogenic metabolic therapy. And of course, the top reason for developing chronic kidney disease is diabetes, I would say, right? So, yeah. So I think it's, to my mind, it should be a no-brainer.
In the study design, I think we do allow people who have some kind of mild diabetes, not like there's some safety issue built in, because we don't just take all patients. I have to manage potential risks, and I think that there's some kind of safety criteria, like that if someone wants to participate in our trial who's diabetic, they have to have certain control, like
right. Yeah.
To be stable, and so I think that I think that would be a possibility. And if the criteria is not satisfied, then it may still be possible to kind of do it in an uncontrolled outside the clinical trial, but you need to be supervised by someone who's knowledgeable. And yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Ginger has a few questions. We'll start at the top. Are the supplements currently being prescribed by doctors? Sounds like the diet will be challenging. As someone who has ADPKD with kids who have it, keep this up, she says. I hope this helps for the future treatments for ADPKD. Mm-hmm. So, Thomas, do you want to speak a bit about how the supplements are being offered? And then again, just touch on the intricacies of the diet.
Yeah, good question. So it's actually non-prescription, but KetoCitra does not require a prescription. So it doesn't have to be prescribed. Of course, in the US, it's regulated as what's called a medical food, which means it's to be taken under medical supervision, but does not need a prescription, which seems a little weird, but that's how it is. So basically, anyone can buy it, but they should really talk to the doctor as well. Of course, many doctors have never heard about it, and we have maybe not done the best job yet spreading the word. So a patient might encounter a stumped doctor that says, "Oh, what is this? I've never heard about it." So maybe as a patient, be prepared to bring some information to your doctor to let them, give them some actual information what it's all about, and Yeah, but there's no prescription needed.
I would just caution doing it like the program, as Thomas detailed, is not just about the supplement, it's also the lifestyle and the diet as well. So the diet is a big part of it. So if you just think that everything will be fine by taking the supplement without changing the lifestyle and the specific diet, like the composition of the diet, I don't think it will have potentially very much advantage. I mean, I would definitely caution anyone doing this, like outside a research setting at this time. Like, this is just my own view.
It's important. It's not a cherry picking diet, so to speak. Like, you need to be tackling it from all aspects. Great insight from both of you on that. Thank you. Our next question, does it matter at what stage one is at with their PKD? Ginger is stage 4. Her nephrologist has never mentioned diet, but she is an RD-CDCES still, so it's important. Can you guys speak a bit about that with respects to the benefits that Ginger could possibly gain from this being stage 4?
I think stage 4 probably is too late. You really have to probably go on this more restrictive diet to. I think that certainly the trial probably will not take patient with, depending on what your kidney function is, the exact value, but my suspicion is this would be in the excluded group. Like we are not actually testing patient with advanced kidney failure for this ketogenic dietary approach.
Yeah, that's right. Right now, stage 4 would be excluded from the trial, and that has, a number of reasons. But I might say that, there's, some good anecdotal data where, and I've just done a video interview, and it's on the Santa Barbara Nutrients YouTube channel. I've done a live interview with Dwight Otland, who is actually a member of our team who has stage 4 PKD. And as soon as he hit GFR 20, he started KetoCitra and sort of like a time-restricted lifestyle. And maybe everyone can check out the video on what his personal experience was. He was actually able to preserve his kidney function for long enough to line up a kidney donor, and then the donor fell through and he had to find another one. So he had, he thinks that it gave him plenty of time to actually do this. But things change at stage 4, right? So some people might be potassium restricted, and there's a lot more maybe monitoring that needs to be done by the doctor, for sure.
Okay, thank you. We're getting a couple questions with respect to the parameters of this upcoming clinical trial, and if being a patient of Dr. Pei's is a prerequisite, or if others from outside of Toronto would be able to participate. So twofold, Dr. Pei, if patient is outside of Toronto logistically, are they a candidate criteria? And then also, if they're not a patient of yours, would they still be able to fit into this study?
They don't have to be a patient of mine, but they do need to be willing to come and get some blood and urine testing, and also MRI scan. Like, there are 2 MRI scans at the beginning and at the end of the study. So if they're willing to travel to Toronto to get all these tests, and I think they would be okay. So, but it is just a bit more difficult if you're not living in the Greater Toronto area.
Okay.
Jeff, just to mention, your audio is fading in and out. You're a little hard to understand sometimes. Not sure if there's something.
Okay, haven't changed anything on my side. How can you hear me okay now?
Yes, now it's good.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. Catherine has a question. She says she's glad there is an option for dietary concerns with PKD. Would this work for patients on hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis?
Well,
well, I would say we have not proven that this work. Like, so I just want you to be cautioned again, not to read too much. Like, and I understand, like, so it depends. If you're thinking about metabolic health, for patient on hemo and PD, I'm just not sure because generally they would require quite a bit of restriction, and I know that so I think that we would need more experience in order to know, and more control kind of study. Maybe this would be another study, like, but this would be for metabolic health, not for, like, if you're on dialysis, you're not going to save your PKD. I mean, like, so so it's for a different reason.
Yeah, I agree. And we're actually, trying to come up with a solution for people on dialysis, but this is still a long ways off, and not yet ripe to talk about it. But it's definitely on the radar that we want to find a solution for those folks as well.
Thank you very much. A question from Colleen. When measuring creatinine as an indicator of kidney function in a patient who does not consume animal products, is it just the absence of animal-based protein waste that can potentially skew the true measurement?
I think your audio is gone again. Not sure what it is. Is your microphone covered?
No, everything is how it's been.
Okay.
Colleen is asking, when measuring creatinine as an indicator of kidney function in a patient who does not consume animal products, is it just the absence of animal-based protein waste that can potentially skew the true measurement, or does plant protein waste also turn into creatinine? As a patient who has been eating plant-based for several years, I am concerned that I really don't know what my function is, because my nephrologist only uses serum creatinine as a measurement.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say there's one potential problem, which is that it's very hit or miss, I think, whether creatinine is measured in fasted patients, an overnight fast or not. And I've seen both, and it might be almost a 50-50 flip of a coin. I think it's actually very important to always measure it in fasted patients, so that you can get rid of the influence of the last meat meal that somebody ate. And there's actually studies on that. If you eat a big turkey dinner and you measure your creatinine right after that, it's like through the roof, and you really have to be overnight fasted to get rid of this artifact. That may not always happen in a typical clinical testing lab. So I would probably say always do it fasted and just stick with it. That's a probably cleaner way of doing it, but I'm sure Jörg has something to say about that as well.
So I think if you don't eat animal protein, your muscle mass likely is quite reduced, and your creatinine actually is not a good way to assess a true kidney function. We also see that quite a lot in the ICU patient who are malnourished, protein malnourished. So just be wary. It just makes your kidney function look a lot better than you actually that it actually is. Like we have many examples of that. It is actually well known in the kidney function measurement method. So there is another way using another marker called cystatin. So using cystatin may provide a kind of a less biased way that is more emphasized on muscle mass-based type of kidney measurement. And there are other markers that can be used to measure kidney function, like inulin, but those are really for kind of very high-level research testing. But I think cystatin-based measurement would be something that is readily available, and there is it is actually going to be available. This is the same kind of argument like, about creatinine, like when you're on any kind of slight protein restriction, that your creatinine will go down and your kidney function will look better, but it actually may not be a true kidney function. And the contrary of that is sometimes we have people who are very muscular. They, let's say, like they're 6'2", and then like they are like a 200-pound muscular weightlifter. So they may actually have high creatinine that make them like they have kidney failure, but their kidney function are perfectly normal. It's just reflecting their muscle mass. So one have to actually be very mindful about the diet and the muscle mass of the individual. And I think that so when you have a diet that potentially can affect your muscle mass, it can also kind of confound the interpretation of kidney function.
Okay. We have another question from Ginger. She says, I mentioned keto diet to my nephrology doctor long ago in 2019 when I heard of it, and it was stated that she's on Genarc and was told to focus on the medication first. So, Dr. Pei, can you speak a bit about when there is the option of diet versus treatment, where one's logic may go? I imagine it's obviously on a patient by patient basis, of course.
It depends what the question is, because if you think that the keto diet is to improve your metabolic health, I think there's probably good chance that it may, if you do it properly. But as I mentioned many times, there's no proven evidence that this actually slow PKD progression. So I think it has not been proven, and you have to. So you can't just jump the gun and just wish that it would. So then you. So I think that that's the whole point that I'm making. We're doing all this study. We are hoping that we will accrue more and more evidence to either convince or dispel our belief that this is beneficial for slowing polycystic disease progression. So there's no evidence for that at this point, certainly not well accepted clinical evidence. So I would say that if you are asking the nephrologist, like what other maneuver that had been proven with very robust data to slow PKD progression, then I think it's tolvaptan, because there are more than 2,000 patients in 2 very large randomized controlled trial showing evidence of slowing the kidney volume expansion or the decline in kidney function. The ketogenic diet, the data is being accrued, but most of them are really anecdotal and uncontrolled. And I also want to make a point, like you may have a survey of a group of people who really are enthusiastic about that, but there is a selection bias, because these people who are on the ketogenic diet, they are not someone walking on the street. Your general Canadian American, they already self-selected for a certain lifestyle, and they believe in certain things. So I think that we need to have a more generalizable pool of individual to study. And then I think what I'm saying is that I'm not saying that it won't be proven to be effective. We just don't know. So I think that so you just have to be mindful of that.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a comment from one of our attendees tonight. They've said, it's not a question, just a comment. I'm so grateful to Dr. Weimbs and Jess Saville for providing hope to PKD patients and for advancing the research in this area. Whether or not the clinical evidence is conclusive at this time, the initial anecdotal results seem promising. This result has been a mental health lifeline for me over the past year or so, giving me hope that there might be an intervention that can slow the progression of PKD. So a comment from one of the attendees who is seems to be well versed in Dr. Weimbs' program and the work that Jess Saville is doing. We have another comment and then 2 remaining questions. I know we're mindful of time here, so thank you both for going over. Julian has commented that it seems likely that fasting would help, but randomized is a good idea, and points out from the web, intermittent fasting improved blood pressure and resting heart rates, as well as other heart-related measurements. Healthy BP is good for kidney health unless it has negative side effects, also that offset it. So do either of you have any comments to add to that?
Not sure exactly what was, there was a question bird in there, but I think Julian, yes, found out that ketogenic diets are actually pretty well established to be beneficial for hypertension. So there's already quite a bit of data out there, and of course, one of the biggest problems with PKD is the early development of hypertension. So from that point of view, it's not at all surprising that a ketogenic approach is beneficial with that one parameter.
Okay, we have a couple last questions, and then we'll allow you both to have your final thoughts before we close out this portion of the event. Ginger has asked, where does the fat come from? Mostly mono or polyunsaturated fats? Avocado, nuts, seeds, olive oil. She states that hope is important, but yes, hopefully one day longer studies will show that this helps. Ginger is level E, so it depends also on family history and how aggressive the progression is. So Thomas, she's asking where the fat comes from.
Sure, yes. Yeah, avocados, nuts, olive oil, exactly. But also, so in the Ren.Nu program, it's not a vegan diet. So there's also animal sources in there, fatty fish, like salmon, for example, butter, full fat dairy, full fat yogurt, for example. So that's usually where the fat sources come from. Even coconut fat is in there. So it's a mixture of good fats, people call it, and maybe avoiding certain things like fats that are very high in omega-6 fatty acids, the kind of the cheap fats out there, the canola and sunflower and soya oil and so on. So they're not really included. Okay,
great. Last question, and we've touched on this, but we'll identify this individual specifics. An anonymous attendee has said, I am stage 5 with 12 or 13% eGFR. Would I qualify for this clinical trial?
I think we have addressed that. I think it's too advanced. I don't think there would be. I think there's potential risks in this group of patients. So I think that our study do not include individual with this late stage of kidney disease.
Okay, that's it for questions, gentlemen. So any last thoughts that you would like to share with the group before we adjourn for the evening with you both?
I just want to say that I'm very supportive of Thomas, but I also want to caution all the patients, not sometimes be careful about internet and anecdotes, because I think we ultimately will need a high level evidence before we can actually recommend this type of approach, for slowing PKD progression. So there are 2 things that you should think about. One is improving metabolic health. I think if you want to take this as an approach, I think there's probably a good chance that you would be able to succeed. But it doesn't mean that it will slow PKD. We don't have really strong evidence, and I think one have to be careful not to over extrapolate.
Yeah, well, just to say thank you, Jeff, for organizing all this and having us here, and thanks to all the patients out there listening. And I always, we have a lot of, 8 or 9 people with PKD on our team at Center Barbara Nutrients. I work with them all day long, and we have something like 2,500 people in my Facebook group, which of course everyone is welcome to join. So there's lots and lots of discussions going on all day long. I think it's important for patients, I think, to not take the disease lying down and not just giving up, but knowing that I think there's something they can do, and people can always improve their diet and lifestyle. And there's no proof. I always like to turn it around. Or there's no proof that a high carbohydrate standard American diet is beneficial in PKD, right? That trial has never been done yet. That's the diet that everybody is on. So I think there's lots and lots of good reasons to avoid certain things. The renal stressors that you really don't want, oxalate, phosphate, food additives, high uric acid, sugar. So everybody can do their part and has it, I think, in their power to influence the progression of the disease.
Thank you both for all of your efforts on behalf of the PKD community, everything that you guys are working on behind the scenes. We here at the PKD Foundation of Canada are excited to promote your clinical trial and to share the findings that come from the subsequent research. So for those in attendance, be sure to stay tuned, stay connected with the PKD Foundation of Canada, and we'll be sure to share any pertinent information related to this study. So with that, gentlemen, I thank you both very much, Dr. Pei, Dr. Weimbs. I wish you all the best and have a great evening.
Excellent. Thank you all.